coming up in this episode.
Looking at those pictures, knowing that I have family in the north of Bosnia, my memories of the war in the beginning was looking at those pictures. Some stories are just too horrific to say in a public. People become worse than animals in war and lose anything that would be deemed humane. Prior to the war, they couldn't eradicate Islam physically during the war, and so the Dayton Agreement was a forced necessity that was put upon the Muslims. Srebrenica is just at the end of the war. There were many Srebrenicas before in Bosnia.
In this episode, I sat down with Ustad Abu Bilal, who's an educator and a khatib at my local masjid here in London. Abu Bilal's father comes from Bosnia, so I wanted to ask him, what was it like growing up at the time? And perhaps, what are some of the lessons that we can take from the war? So let's begin episode 7. I'm here with Ustad Abu Bilal, who I have been listening to for many, many years at my local masjid, who's a regular khatib. He's also involved in the community when it comes to Muslim schools, and he also happens to originally be from Bosnia, or half Bosnian. And inshallah, today I'll be asking him a series of questions. So without further ado, inshallah, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about your background.
Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Sanel Haskić. In the community, I'm known as Muallim Abu Bilal Sanel. But yeah, I'm a teacher by profession. Work with mainly Islamic schools, consultancy, different hats, sometimes as a teacher, sometimes in educational management, leadership, different things. I am from Switzerland, grew up in Switzerland, but obviously my background from my father's side is from Bosnia. So I grew up in Switzerland, spent there my first 20 years, then moved to Medina for 7 years. Then came back to Switzerland for a couple of months, and then from 2008 moved to the UK, Ilford to be specific, and was involved in education since.
What does being from Bosnia mean to you?
That's a kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. An interesting one. Thinking back to my childhood, Bosnia, that was pre-war. Still Tito was, Marshal Tito was the effective president of not just Bosnia, but Yugoslavia as it was known prior to the war, with all the countries that subsequently split, obviously. But for us, it was, once a year we go there. It was a drive from Switzerland, it's a long drive, a road trip, whole day. And then effectively it was this zone where we could do whatever we want as kids, obviously aunties there, family there, relatives there. And it meant that, once a year we go and visit them and play and have a great time, especially during the summer. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is that it did connect me to Bosnia. Specifically, I can remember through my name. So we grew up in Switzerland in a tourist place, very beautiful, scenic place. And we were kind of, there were not many, at my school, there were not many other students that are not Swiss, okay? And my name would always be that differentiating factor, Haskić. So the ich in the end, the IC or the ich, the ch, quite clearly, would make it clear to everyone that I am not 100% Swiss. So my mom is Swiss, obviously my dad is from Bosnia. But I grew up knowing that in the back of my head that, although I speak the same language, even the same Swiss slang of German, and, all my classmates were Swiss, that something is still different. At the beginning, it was very clear that, okay, I'm half Bosnian, I do know another language. And it was this mixed bag. So sometimes they were kind of, today we would call them racist jokes. At that time, it was kind of normal. You would say, "What's your name?" And you say, "Sanel Haskić," and people would say, "Oh, bless you," things like that and whatnot. But it was kind of, that was growing up. On the other side, or later on, it became clear that there is more to it, not just the heritage that is different, or the country, or the language that I spoke at home with my father, but there is a whole religion that is different. And so, on top of the cultural identity, now comes a religious identity that did impact, especially during my youth, after that. And then on top of that, then that's where the war started. And so this is obviously the time where people search for their identity search, big thing. It was a mixed bag.
Jazakallah khair. We're going to talk about the war, inshallah, shortly. But just considering that the wars happened, what is it like being received as a Bosnian? So, for example, when people find out where you're from, what's the kind of reactions that you usually get? Is there anything that links it to almost, or reminds you of what happened in Bosnia?
So again, I can reflect back to my time in Switzerland, and then maybe also today what it means. So back in Switzerland, there was no internet at that time, not like today, no social media. So the news was still, we're getting news from the TV, and the people, although it's an hour's flight from Switzerland where I grew up, people started to take notice of what's happening in Bosnia and everything, and then starting to link it to you. Switzerland, generally, the people are kind-hearted, at least in your face. Okay, smile and nice and helpful, supporting. We got all of that. There is no question about it. What is going on behind that is a different story. People can be cold sometimes and two-faced and whatnot. But generally speaking, it didn't mean something bad. Subsequently, after the war, different story. So there was always the far right, as we know in every country, and there was always someone to blame. So yes, there was a period of time after, I don't know, the Tamils and the Italians first, and then the Tamils, and then it was the turn of the Yugos, as they would call everyone from the Balkans, referring to Yugoslavia. Yugos, they are, bringing us down, the economy, taking our pay, the whole argument. So I am kind of, okay, am I that part? Because I have a Swiss passport, but I do identify so it was a very tricky one. Later on, and as I grew and as I became older, during my youth, 14, 15, 16, I started to see it as a strength. And I can vividly remember there came this moment where I said to myself, everybody's searching for something to stand out. You are USP, unique selling point, not in business, but as a shakhsiya, as an identity, as a personality. And, I had classmates, they were really good at skiing or football or, music or different things. Amongst the best in Switzerland, in fact. And I was always like, okay, I'm average at everything. And then I sort of, wait a second, I do have something quite unique in terms of the language advantage, in terms of the cultural advantage, in terms of the travels that we have done, not just to Bosnia, but, even to other countries. And then first and foremost, in terms of the religion, this is a whole different dimension that now opens up to me. And once we started to explore that and connect that to Bosnia, where obviously we have this even religious identity from, that is a whole complete different dimension that then just started to open up for us. Today, many years later, it's a badge of honor. If you say, I am Bosnian, although I did not live through the war in Bosnia, it is something that I carry with dignity. It is something that I identify with, at least in parts. I have no shame. There were times in the very beginning where you try to hide and whatnot, try to fit in and whatnot. Not anymore. And I say that to every youngster as well in our schools where I'm involved with, in scouting and, the youth work and the tarbiyah programs that we have. All of this, and a lot of our youngsters have this kind of mixed identity. Sometimes parents from different countries, sometimes I said, take it as a badge of honor. Carry it with dignity. This is something that makes you not just unique, it gives you an advantage. It gives you a whole new language. There are people out there, they don't know how it sounds when you speak in a different language. They don't know the foods that you're tasting. They don't know the cultural. There's a lot of bad stuff that is happening, but there are so many positives. Take it as a badge of honor and take it as something that is actually unique, and brings you in a unique position. So Bosnia nowadays, definitively something to say, this is something I am very proud to identify with.
What are some of the stories that you heard or that you've read or that you recollect? Was there any involvement from yourself in terms of, did you ever visit during that time or try to assist and aid? Is there any stories from your family members? Tell us everything, inshallah.
Well, how much time do you have? Bismillah. So I'm not a historian, so I'm pretty sure that and some of the personalities that you have interviewed will give you an in-depth history in terms of Bosnia. But suffice to say that Bosnia, and this is something that I would get from my grandma in Bosnia, Allah yarhamha, she passed away a couple of years ago. She used to tell me that we were, we used to wear niqab, not just hijab, but niqab when we were youngsters. So Islam was very, very strong on the Balkans. And just to make everyone clear about the geography here, we're talking here about a country in Europe, close to Austria, close to Italy, most scenic place you can imagine. A 2 hours flight from the UK, a 1 hour flight from Switzerland. It is something that is very close to us. And Islam was thriving. And we're talking here about, about 100 years ago, more or less. Then came the First World War, Second World War. Bosnia was very much involved in both of those wars. In fact, some of those wars actually started in Sarajevo. If you actually join some of our trips that we do regularly from the UK to Bosnia, you would actually go and see where some of the world wars started. You can actually identify the exact spot. So Bosnia was involved, and with everything that comes with the war thorn and poverty and the rest of it. Then comes Marshal Tito. I think that's the next big chapter. Marshal Tito was ruling not just Bosnia, but Yugoslavia, because Bosnia is only now an independent country. Obviously, it was formerly part of Yugoslavia. He was ruling Yugoslavia, and this is now from my father, with an iron fist, communist leaning party. And it was basically what a lot of Muslims from Bosnia didn't know at that time is that the entire school system, it was a system of indoctrination. It was a very nationalistic kind of upbringing that my father's generation went through. It was Marshal Tito on the top, at the top. You got to almost worship Marshal Tito. Your Islamic or Muslim identity was out of the window. There came a date where my grandma was saying very clearly, not just the niqab, but the hijab, everything has to be taken off. The imams in the masajid became almost, not almost, but in some, quite literally in some cases, spies for the state. You go to the masjid several times a day or even several times a week and you would end up in prison. It was a very, very nationalistic approach to governing, and the Adaika. So 50 years of communism in the lead up to the war in the early 90s. That was a very it is very telling that when Marshal Tito died in the 80s, my dad was actually very sad because, again, the indoctrination that they had to endure in this very sneaky way, he was a hero. Only now my dad is, kind of realized, or during the war and then subsequently, what actually happened and how much there was suppression of a Muslim identity and history in Bosnia. Anyways, what led up to the war, obviously, Marshal Tito died, and then since there was no one to sort of fill in the vacuum. Lot of nationalistic movements, and then also from a Serb perspective, there was history, what they remember from the Ottoman time, not directly, but from their fathers and forefathers, etc. And there was a very nationalistic movement about splitting, about anyways, a lot of history there. And there was a clear plan. Obviously, it started in the north, Serbia, Slovenia. That ended quite quickly. Then Croatia for a time. And then even that kind of, I didn't say came to an end, but there was an agreement that we now will turn towards Bosnia, which is at the center. It is, if you look at the map now and how Yugoslavia was, it is the heart of former Yugoslavia. It is right in the center, in the middle. And there was a clear agreement how we're going to, between the Croatian and the Serbs, how we're going to split Bosnia, how we're going to divide it, who's going to get which part. And the only reason some historians say that Bosnia is what it is now is because they couldn't really agree. And so there was a disagreement there. Bosnia then woke up and, bifadlillah, with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously a big role in that was also due to Ali Izetbegovic, the former first president of Bosnia, who was imprisoned prior to the war for his beliefs. He wrote books about the Muslim identity, etc., etc. He became president. When he came out of prison, he was the president during the war. And this is something that, he then put it out for a vote. Bosnia voted to become independent in the beginning of the war. The neighboring countries didn't like that because obviously they wanted to have a share in that. And from that onwards, it was all-out war in Bosnia with many instances of genocide, certain villages that were completely ransacked, very early pictures that then flooded our TVs in Switzerland as well, in Europe, here in the UK, in the world, where we could see some of those camps where Muslims were gathered, didn't get anything to eat. There were very clear instances of brutal treatment of anyways, so this is what we are now seeing. And growing up in Switzerland, I was 10, 11, 12 at that time, looking at those pictures, knowing that I have family in the north of Bosnia. My memories of the war in the beginning was looking at those pictures, gaining a perspective, knowing that this is, part of me, trying to find my footing there, trying to identify, try to ask questions. You can't just Google anything at that point. It is still the early 90s, and then endless trying to call every day, spending hours on end between myself and my two brothers, just being on those old phones, just turning the dial. Those old phones, you can see them in the movies now. But we would spend hours and hours just dialing, trying to just hear the voice. That is it. Just one auntie, one, grandma, anyone, to just hear the voice that they're still alive. That was it. And then the whole thing starts again the next day, and so on and so forth. So that were my early memories of Bosnia. During the war, my grandfather just passed away at the very beginning of the war due to illness. And my father was, shall I go, shall I not go? He went to the funeral, came back, and it was kind of last second escape kind of thing. And then the entire charity sector started to open up. So, okay, we need to do something about it. We started to collect a lot of things, food items and other things, medication, a lot of stuff, and then just really trying to bring lorries and trucks. And I went with one of I can remember with my dad as the eldest amongst the brothers, going to Zagreb to deliver medicines to a specific place, which that was Zagreb is the capital city of Croatia. It was peaceful to go up till there. Croatia kind of withdrew from the north of Bosnia at that point. There were problems with the Croatian troops in the south, but we could access Zagreb, and from there would be aid going into Bosnia later on. So this is still I'm a young adult trying to figure out my identity, trying to figure out how we can help. Seeing those pictures in front of us, these are my memories of Bosnia.
Perhaps tell us a bit about some of the stories that were coming out at the time. A lot of people have told me that some of the stories that they heard about that time and the things that were happening, they're not like what we see today in war. They were very, very different. There was a different level of hatred that the people had towards the Muslims there. And maybe tell us a bit about the Bosnians themselves. How were they organizing? How were they resisting this?
So again, just to put it in context, I'm a youngster at that point, and what is different to today, and I think that is really important for the context here, is that the stories that you're getting, they are in the past, the recent past. Nowadays, when we look at Gaza and Palestine and conflicts that are happening around the world and genocides that are happening around the world, these pictures are live, and you hear the stories almost as they happen. In Bosnia, it was, okay, it happened weeks ago, months ago. We escaped and we are here to tell the story kind of thing. You hear it in the past almost, although being albeit the recent past, but it is the past. And some of the stories then you have to verify and whatnot. But the point here is, it is, some stories are just too horrific to say in a public. It is, I share them with some individuals, maybe during the trips when we go to some of the journeys and some stuff. But it is truly, people become worse than animals in war and lose anything that would be deemed humane. Humanity is out of the window. Some of the stories and incidents that we heard that have happened are indescribable. Just as if there's a competition of how can we take the karama and the dignity of people away in the most horrific way. And just as if there's a competition as who can do it even more horrific. So I don't want to really focus on that too much, but Bosnia and Bosnians as a nation is a nation of dignity. So even though you will hear these stories, sometimes from, around the campfire or, if you're alone, Bosnians by and large today don't want to talk too much about it because, at least what I found, it's a very, very much a nation, a people of dignity, not victimhood mentality. And they want to talk more about the hikam, the wisdoms, the lessons that we can learn from that episode, from the war, and how we can move on from that point. Yes, there is the Srebrenica Day. That is a stark reminder that there was a genocide, officially now legally called a genocide, by the way, that has happened, barely 30 years ago in Europe. And we're not learning about it in school. We do learn what happened during the First World War, during the Second World War, but this seems to be a chapter lost. So yes, that is the remainder, like a stark reminder for all of us. True. Having said that, a lot of Bosnians, and I've interviewed, we have family friends from Bosnia, people who have lost their fathers in Srebrenica, close family friends. They want to talk about the lessons. They want to talk about how do we prevent it in future. Because, again, there was 50 years of communism prior to the war. There was 50 years of trying to eradicate Islam and the Muslim identity in the Balkans through a systematic move top down from the government, army, institutions, media, you name it. That didn't work out. Yes, they would be able to eradicate. I mean, a lot of Bosnians nowadays, you see, Salah, very rare, Ramadan, very rare. That you see the generations that they could eradicate the practice of Islam, but the Bosnians will carry with a level of yaqeen, the shahada in their hearts, which is, I have not seen many other people like that. And from that spark of iman and that spark of the shahada came the entire resistance. It was built on that La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. From there, everything started to be rebuilt and people started to come. And one of the unique things that happened in Bosnia is that anyone who came to help, to support, whether this is in terms of physical help or charity, also, they were all immediately under the command of Ali Izetbegovic within the official Bosnian army. And there was no, there were in the beginning some fractions in here, but it was rooted out very quickly. They were from the beginning with very little weapon, next to nothing, stones and rocks and hammers and what they could find in terms of tools in their houses. The resistance started and was building up. This is what I hear. Obviously, I wasn't there. I can't. But from what we heard, and the resistance started to be very organized. And this is something quite unique to Bosnia. Quite unique in the sense that later on in other conflicts that were happening, there were much more. There was much more disunity. So in Bosnia, this was, I think, from the beginning, it was quite unique and quite strong, and it kept the people together. And there was a lot of dawah, a lot of learning Islam anew, and that happened during the war as well. And you can see today, anyone who knows Bosnia before the war and compares the situation to how it is now, you will see a stark difference in terms of Muslim presence, Muslim identity, a very, I don't like to use the word tolerant Muslim because Islam is tolerant in its essence. Nothing is forced. But the practiced Islam in Bosnia right now is an Islam that is growing in terms of presence, growing in terms of identity, in terms of practicing. And it wasn't like that before the war. It was very hidden in the shadows. And yes, people go there and say, why is this now? They still have complaints and whatnot. Habibi, do you know where we came from? You know anything about the history? There's a long way to go. There's a long way to go still. But it is the same 50 years, like one of the personalities in Bosnia. He said famously that it took 50 years, 50 steps to try to dismantle Islam and the Muslim identity in Bosnia. We need to take the same 50 steps back. There is no lift or no shortcut. We have to walk it back, and it will take some time. But I hope, inshallah, that it will be a stronger, more practiced Islam that is now developing in Bosnia. Something that is, how to put this, more balanced. Again, the word balance is maybe not the right one. Apologize for my English, but something that is conscious and is grown up in the context of how Islam is perceived in the entire world.
Jazakallah khair. Talk to us about how did the war come to an end? How did that happen? And tell me a bit more about the things that you mentioned about how the Bosnians, they want to speak about the lessons from this episode. What are those lessons?
Well, effectively, the historians can give you the exact reasons as to how the war came to an end, but how it is perceived on the ground, and I'm speaking to my own family, relatives, other friends and family friends in Bosnia, and many students who came to study with and love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala subsequently, is the kind of common opinion on the street is that they couldn't eradicate Islam politically prior to the war. They couldn't eradicate Islam physically during the war. And so the Dayton Agreement was a forced necessity that was put upon the Muslims in Bosnia, and to put them in that kind of political stalemate that they have at the moment. It is one of the most complicated political situations that you find in Bosnia at the moment, with a government that is built up with so many MPs. It has to be in a certain specific way to represent every fraction within the country. It is almost impossible to pass a law. It is a very fragile situation politically seen, but it is what it is. And then subsequently they started an entire agenda of against the Arabs that were still in Bosnia, any foreigners or deemed foreigners in Bosnia. There was a whole campaign, media campaign against them. There is a whole campaign against charities that were very active in Bosnia. And you see, mistakes were done and nothing is perfect, but by and large, there was a lot of khair, a lot of goodness, not just for Muslims, but for the entire Bosnian population. So there is a kind of a third wave now where they try to maybe not eradicate, but definitively minimize the influence that any Muslim or Muslim identity or Muslim presence should be kind of minimized. There are forces they don't want to see that in Europe, not in a majority. Bosnia is still a Muslim majority country, although statistically it is almost on the verge at the moment. But again, there are games and political games that are played out nowadays in this third attempt almost to minimize the Muslim influence in Bosnia, which is sad. Because when we speak about free speech and I know we would kind of advocate democracy from a Western perspective and whatnot, let the people decide their own path. Which anyway, a lot of games, a lot of things are happening. On the ground, however, what the Bosnians want you to know, and I've interviewed for my school, I've spoken, again, family, friends, I've been in Srebrenica, in the very places where, the genocides happened. And by the way, Srebrenica is just the one that we know. Srebrenica is just at the end, at the end of the war. There were many Srebrenicas before in Bosnia, many villages that mass graves and all of that. This is just the pinnacle, really, Srebrenica today. But again, people want you to know that let's not repeat history. Let's learn from history. So they share with you lessons like know who you are, know your Muslim identity. And this is not something that is said in an extreme way or, you have to kind of be completely intolerant with everyone else and the world is black and white. No, not at all. The Bosnians are the most welcoming, open people when it comes to that. And Sarajevo was, it was an example of how religions can live next to each other. You will see in the center of Bosnia synagogues and churches and mosques and whatnot. But know your history, know your identity, be proud of it. Don't be arrogant, but be proud of that history, of your identity. Carry it with dignity in your heart. And don't be, so that's one lesson. The second lesson they want you to know is don't be naive. No, we don't need to go into conspiracy theories and whatnot, but be educated enough to be able to see the symptoms and the signs when it comes to that point. And what we see today with the far right and with the whole movement and whatnot, we got to be prepared, carefully prepared for that situation. And again, the message here is not to play into some victimhood mentality that has been tried by some other people. We do not want to follow that path. So Islamophobia, yes, recognize it, have institutional measures organizations, ways to tackle Islamophobia professionally, but don't teach it as the identity of Islam and your Islam to your children and make it, the only thing that you really teach to your children. No, we don't want a generation that grows up in fear. We want to have a generation that grows up with a strong Muslim identity, with a strong sense of belonging to a greater ummah, to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be from the Ahlul Quran, to the seerah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to carry this with dignity, with pride, but not arrogance. That is the message. And when these Islamophobic attacks happen, don't be naive. Be educated enough to know how to professionally tackle them. Don't be reactive. Wait for too long, or be very reactive in your response that it almost becomes like like it happened in Bosnia. People just literally being escorted to a mass grave while still alive, put on their knees and just shot in their head like lambs, to the slaughterhouse. May Allah protect all of us and all the Muslims and all the victims around the world. This dhulm needs to stop, and we need to be educated enough to see the signs for it. These are the two main messages that a lot of Bosnians want you to know. And then as a third message, learn your Islam, learn your religion, and don't make it a cultural thing. Yes, culture has some impact, in general, as long as it doesn't go against the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a beautiful thing. You have different cultures, and we are on the verge of Ramadan. May Allah grant us Ramadan. Different cultures around the world perceive Ramadan in different ways, and that is the most beautiful thing in terms of food and culture and cultural practices. As long as they go within the framework of Islam and they don't go against normative Islamic practices, this is a beautiful thing. But once you make that your religion, i.e. the culture becomes your religion, then we have a problem. So what they say is, look, we didn't know that. In fact, we were made to hate it almost and not learn about Islam. This is what is unique about this beautiful religion. This tawheed is a beautiful thing. It connects you directly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a beautiful thing. Know about your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Know about the seerah. Know about the things that make this ummah a unique ummah, a special ummah, an ummah that is beneficial to not just the Muslims but the entire world. Make that your priority. Learn about your deen, and then practice it. You don't need. Not everyone needs to speak about da'wah and talking and calling people like that to Islam, but just your behavior in your normal job, with your families, outside, just your behavior, your character, the way you interact with the people next to you, that is an advocate of our beautiful faith.
Jazakallah khair. You kind of answered the last questions that I had, but I'll just repeat them in case there's anything that you want to add. So I'll just list them. So one question was, how does it affect Bosnians today? That whole episode, how does it affect the psyche of Bosnians today? How does it impact the wider ummah? So we know, for example, my father tells me that Bosnia was the time that woke them up in the UK regarding Islam. And lastly, what would your message be to the people, the youth especially, who haven't heard about what happened in Bosnia? Why should they know about this? Why should they listen to this story?
I mean, just to answer the last question, as much as we learn about all the other historic things that have happened in the last 100 years or so, in school, at school, learn about the World War I, II, and other conflicts. This is a very, very important chapter for Muslims living in Europe. Okay, this is very recent history. And it will definitively impact the way you look at Bosnia, it will impact the way you look at yourself, and how you look at the ummah, and how you look at conflicts today. It helps you contextualize it way more than if you don't know anything about it. Having said that, we must be 100% clear. As I said and mentioned earlier, the war is not over. Yes, the physical war is over, but the media war, is in full flare, even in Bosnia at the moment. And the big message, away from the lessons that the Bosnians will tell you, the sentiment that was there during the war and is also there to some degree now is the same sentiment you hear from our brothers and sisters in Gaza, in Burma, in Kashmir, in many of the places, and it is, have you forgotten us? This is the one message that that I've heard time and again. It is something that, they couldn't imagine how literally there were bombs raining on them for days on end. There was no food. Sarajevo, the capital city of Bosnia, was completely cut off the world, and they couldn't imagine how an ummah of such strength in terms of number and governments and money and all of this, how they could completely have forgotten them. This is just that's basically the last straw. It kills your hope, and when there is no hope, there is no future. And so the sentiment and that the Bosnians will share with you in regards to what we need to carry on for conflicts today is, don't forget them. And I'll give you a very practical example, okay? Away from a fiqh debate. There's a fiqh debate regarding that as well, but away from that, the demonstrations that are happening at the moment for Palestine, and so there's a whole discussion. Do Muslims go and participate or not? And, what's the benefits? And there's a whole fiqh discussion about it. So aside from all of that, if and when you do join one of those demonstrations, with the adab that is required and with all the, keeping it within the law and all of that, the one intention that you must remember is that this is something that this is a message that you're sending to the people who are in the conflict at the moment right now. And they see it when there are thousands of Muslims and non-Muslims marching in the capital city of the UK, of Germany, of America, and they show a sign of support. Just this message gives them strength to carry on. It basically makes them aware that we haven't forgotten them. And yes, there is way more we need to do than that. But this message that you're giving in a couple of hours when you, and I don't say you have to participate in every single demonstration or anything like that, but just when you go, and if you have, when you have time and you go there, make this your intention. Not a political change and whatnot. These are all things that may happen, may not happen and whatnot, This is your intention, that you are showing a message of support with all the adab, all the morals and etiquettes that are required in such a moment. Don't be, hot-headed and do some crazy stuff. And I'm not asking for none of that. Just the message of support, because that is the last thing that will die in a conflict. And I got the message from Srebrenica, I got the message from Sarajevo, I got the message from many, many, many places that this is what we felt during the war, that people have forgotten us. And this is in many ways worse than not eating for days and not drinking for days and the bombing and whatnot. If basically no one is aware of your situation, and you lose the hope. And so with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously, alhamdulillah, things turned out much better. You can extrapolate it to even today. Sometimes you get the sentiments today because the political war, the media war is still going on. And the Bosnians are, still restricted in travel to some degree. And so there's economic restrictions and whatnot. And this sentiment, have they forgotten us and forgotten what happened to us, is still ongoing. So when you travel to Bosnia today, for example, and show them we haven't forgotten you. And yes, we want to talk about the war, but we also want to talk about your beautiful country. We want to talk about the future. We want to talk about you being part of the ummah. We want to talk about how beautiful the masajid are and how we can practice here. And that is a sign of support as well. And so, maybe rather than spending money on holidays to certain countries, consider maybe that as a sign, as a part of your intention at least. inshallah.
That's it for this episode. I'd like to thank Ustad Abu Bilal for his time in sitting with us here today. As we come to the end of this series, the next episode will be some extra recordings from some of the interviews and some reflections of the guests. So, I'll see you in part 8.